Hi, welcome to the show, The Leading Force. I'm your host, Sunil Hali. In this show, we host the most accomplished individuals and organizations who have done extraordinary success and made our community proud. Dr. Surendra Kaushik. He's an economist, an academician, a philanthropist, and a visionary in the field of economics and international financial institutions, advising them, guiding them. And now, after winning so many accolades in last 20 years in US, he has been decorated with the highest civilian award which any non-resident Indian, as we call them, NRIs, get from the President of India at Pravasi Samman Divas, which recently concluded in Jaipur in Rajasthan in the first week of January. And with us we have Dr. Surendra Kaushik.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So Dr. Saab, this is extraordinary after having been recognized, felicitated in New York Assembly, New Jersey Assembly, Children's Hope, Hind Ratan, Jewel Awards, all these kind of accolades that you have got in last decade. This is the finale for any NRI?
Yes.
So when you got the call that you are one of the honorees this year, we have two this year from USA.
Yes.
What crossed your mind?
What crossed my mind was the happiness, the joy of not only me, but India doing well. And India doing well based on education, knowledge, reaching out to the world, and looking at the whole world as its home, which has been our philosophy for a very long time. And for myself being in the United States for about 42 years, 41 plus years.
Yeah, it's a long journey.
A long journey. But it signifies not just me, but our accomplishments.
But were you expecting it?
Obviously, I have been nominated and I have been recommended. But as you know, out of 27 to 30 million people, to pick 15, as you know, this year.
And only two from US.
Only two from US, and this year, of the 14 individuals, there are 11 countries represented.
Right, and there are about 30 million
right.
non-resident Indians all over the world.
Right, and in the United States we have
almost 4 million.
Almost 4 million.
Right.
So you can calculate the odds of how many people, how many hundreds of people are achieving, given the fact that Indians are at least 50% better in every respect, in terms of education level, in terms of economic level, in terms of salary levels, business success in the entire American society.
Sure, we'll come to that as we come back.
So I was thrilled, and I just I said to a friend, and actually I said in my response to the government when they asked me if I would accept the award and would attend in person.
Right.
And in my official response, I used the word ecstatic to answer your question as to how did I feel.
Now this event took place in Jaipur, which is your home state.
Yes.
Tell us about your family.
My family is on the intellectual and spiritual side, the history. My grandfather, his family was near Bhiwani in Haryana, what is now Haryana.
Right.
At the time, some 110 years ago, in Greater Punjab.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a Sanskrit student. He got his degree from Banaras Sanskrit at that time.
That was the highest institution.
Exactly. And he started looking for a job. So he came across Haryana or Punjab at the time into Rajasthan and just looking in different villages. And in this particular village, Mulsisar, one young girl, a daughter of a very rich business person, had become a widow. And she was a young teenager, and she didn't want to get married again. And the family had made a temple for her in the big Haveli, the biggest Haveli in my village, Mulsisar actually. So my grandfather ended up there looking for a job. And the Sethji offered him the job of being a pujari, and that if he were to start the service in the Haveli itself for the daughter, and then they will start building a new temple in Malsisar. And he accepted the job offer, and he stayed there. And the Sethji, he built the biggest Satyanarayan temple.
Is that true?
In Malsisar, right?
Oh,
so, and he was such a simple person and intellectual and spiritual that nobody called him by his first name. He was known only as Rishiji.
Wow.
So that
How
tells
nice.
you the background.
What did your father do?
My father was Ayurvedic Ved.
And your mom?
Mom was a housewife and a farmer.
Oh, she was a farmer?
She was a farmer, yeah.
Very interesting. And Dr. Kaushik, you grew up in beautiful Rajasthan. And your father, you said, was a Ved and grandfather was a spiritualist. How did this idea of getting into economics come to your mind?
Well, first of all, as a child growing up in village, you see there are only 1, 2, 3 people important, like the headmaster and like the village doctor with MBBS and so on. And they are powerful, they are in leadership, so it clicked that education is the key.
But in a small place like that, you had institutions like that?
We had institutions. And then we looked around that people making decisions at the time, this was late 40s, around the time of independence. And clearly economic condition and the slogans we heard and the independence movement and the result of that, and that India has to move up, and the economic conditions surrounding, and focusing on studies, that's where I got the idea of the state of economic life.
You're talking of a young man, like 10, 12 years old, and really reacting to the society in 60s probably?
In the 50s,
late 50s,
late 40s, wow. Early 50s.
Why did you want to become a doctor or an engineer, which was a given at that time?
It was given, and actually my family asked me to, and upon high school I did get admission in BITS Pilani, which is in the neighborhood, only 35 kilometers away. At the time it was known as Birla College, And I was there for 2-3 days, kind of a thing. But because in the village school there was no science, so people and faculty advised that there is a neighboring, one of the best commerce colleges in the area, Podar College, Navalgarh, and they recommended that I should go and check it out and speak with the principal. And once I got there, he wouldn't leave, and he says, "Oh, son, you stay here. You are good at commerce, so you do BCom, and don't go into new field of engineering."
So if you close your eyes, when you think about Dr. Surendra Kaushik, an economist, successful, well-recognized person, that image must come to your mind. If that principle did not guide you at that time, who knows, you could be a different person today.
Very correct, very correct.
And then came the big move moving to New Delhi.
Right, yeah.
How was it like? That was a big city at that time.
That was phenomenal, because after BCom, I moved on to Jaipur, University of Rajasthan Economics Department, which was very powerful at the time, because people like the famous economist Raja Chelaya, who is famous for the Chelaya tax committee reforms and so on in the late 80s, early 90s. He was there, and Professor M.B. Mathur, who was a member of the Education Commission of India and so forth. He was there. And then the famous economist Raj Krishna was there via Delhi School Institute of Economic Growth. And a very famous Professor Gyan Singh Bhalla was there, who had come from London School of Economics.
Well, that was a mecca.
It was a phenomenal department. So once I finished there, the next stop was direct to go to Delhi School and Institute of Economic Growth, where you had Professor P. Andar, Professor A.M. Khusro, and at the Delhi School, of course, all the luminaries, Professor Sen and Bhagwati and Chakravarti and
the
Nagar,
names that reverberate when it comes to economics.
Exactly, all of them were there, and I said I could not find a better place. And in '68, Dr. Manmohan Singh was also there. So we used to have coffee in the Indian Coffee House behind Delhi School of Economics. Right?
And then you stayed in Delhi School, or in Delhi actually, for not more than 2 or 3 years.
2.5 years.
And very quickly moved to Boston.
Correct, yes.
How did Boston come to you?
Well, because in Delhi School of Economics and Institute of Economic Growth, there was this environment. of connecting with the world, thinking
Right.
big, doing research. Every day there are seminars from Planning Commission, Indian Statistical Institute, and all the foreign professors coming on from London and Chicago and Boston and so on. So that was the environment, very, very charged up intellectual environment. And everybody's coming and going. So people suggested that I should also go abroad. And I said, no, I'm happy here. And they said, no, you got to go. So we applied, and in '69 I got the letter of admission and fellowship. So
You were not married?
No, I was not married.
So he's a young man who moves from a small village to a big city in
Right.
Rajasthan, moves
Right.
from a big city to a bigger city called Delhi,
Right,
and then suddenly makes a big leap to Boston.
Right,
America was a big dream.
right.
Any cultural shock when you came here?
Yeah, it was. And mostly it was positive, But I have to tell you another little story. That the day I took the flight out of Delhi in 1970, and when I got to the ladder, we had to walk out in the tarmac
Right, at that
in
time.
those days.
There was this.
And one of the persons stopped me and he said, "May I look at your boarding pass?" And he did. And I said, "Oh, there's some kind of a problem here, whatever." He says, "The plane is full, but we have put you in first class,
Wow.
and your seat number is A1."
Wonderful.
So that's how I started my journey. The very first flight in my life,
You
out
were
of Delhi, I was bumped up to first class in seat number A1. So that has been the journey ever since.
So
yes.
God was always smiling on you.
Absolutely, yes.
Who, when you think, if you have any, maybe your father, maybe your grandfather, or the principal, has there been any mentor in your life?
Oh,
You have mentored so many
yes,
students
yes,
now
yes,
as a teacher.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when you look back, has there been any mentor in your life?
Well, there are so many actually. It's a very long list, obviously.
But
you know,
still, there
if
must be
persons-
one person that strikes.
Yeah, but if one person, we made a film of what we have done, a documentary of our college that we set up for girls, and in which I dedicate the film to three women, my grandmother and my mother and my wife. So in a very generic sense, those three forces and the spirit really have guided, and their character, their value system, and their love for the family and the neighborhood and the people in the village, and very broad, accepting thinking. All these three women had.
So they're your spiritual guideline.
Yes.
We'll come back to you after a short break
Right,
and
right.
take this thing forward and
Thank you.
let people know who Dr. Surendra Kaushik
Thank
is.
you.
We'll be right back after this short break. Stay right there.